All right, welcome everyone to the Cluster Addons meeting. Today is the 4th of February. Looks like right now we don't have any new faces, so no introductions and actions from last time. Yes, so we were able to rename our repository from add-on operators to cluster add-ons. That is done. I was actually quite surprised how often it was referenced in various places across GitHub. That was a nice surprise. And yes, we had the add-on discovery draft PR. Justin, I seem to remember you. We're going to take a look or give some feedback.
I managed to take a look in the last hour or so. I have not put any feedback on there. I guess I think the reason I wanted to take a look was because I know that there are lots of other efforts and I'm just trying to figure out how it all fits into it. Like, it sounds like, Nick is not here, right? So maybe I'll comment on the PR. But yeah, like trying to understand, it sounds like he didn't get any real pushback from the application CRD, which surprises me given that there's a lot of overlap. But then, yeah, like figuring out, there are some great things in here, but I know we've also had our own debates about like whether we want to surface components status on an aggregate CRD or whether we consider that a security issue potentially. So just like going through sort of the assumptions in here and sort of trying to figure out why we are doing them. But I will post a comment on there as Nick is not here, unless he shows up.
I think he was planning to come, but just in case he doesn't, we were also very surprised that the SIG apps didn't think that this was very similar to what they were trying to do. So maybe we presented it in the wrong way, but yeah, it's along those lines. I think the main difference is that this is really just trying to be an inspection tool right now, at least just giving you like an aggregate view of what a thing is in your cluster and what it can do.
So we could actually have an application and an add-on, I guess, on the same set of resources. Maybe that was why they didn't see a challenge. But yeah, it's interesting. Cool. Well, if Nick doesn't show up, I'll post some like proper comments. Thank you.
All right. We also had a draft cap, the manifest bundle cap. Sure if you can see the document. Yeah, I can't see any comments from anyone. So maybe that's something. Or Evan, did you want to say anything?
I just wanted to mention that this is now a draft cap in the enhancements repo instead of a Google Doc.
Okay.
Just because there wasn't any, didn't seem like there was any feedback. So I figured we could discuss it there. And then I know I see Sean joined the call, and I know that this was discussed at the KubeBuilder face-to-face last week. So Sean, do you have any updates from that side that you'd like to share?
No. Basically, like the KubeBuilder folks are gonna go look at the cap and also comment on that. They had some initial feedback around like we should actually add a name for the things instead of saying name. Like in things, we should actually start naming stuff. But that was the minor feedback. Other than that, there was going to be more discussion, hopefully, on that PR.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so further discussion there sounds like the next step.
Super. Yes, so Lee and I wanted to bring up the Google Summer of Code. We're a bit late. I think the application deadline is tomorrow sometime. The question was just generally because there's currently a bunch of things in flight, and if it was a good idea, if somebody of us was willing to mentor one or two of the things, if we would get help that way.
I'm certainly happy to be like a mentor type or like whatever the correct term is, but I don't know what project we would do. And I guess one project we could do would be, go and build cluster add-ons for a whole bunch of things. And as things arise, then, go and fix those things in the right way. Right. So like, but probably, I guess if it was just going and like packaging a bunch of manifests, that would be sort of a boring summer of code. So hopefully some challenges would arise that were more challenging. And that could be a really great outcome for someone's like CV or resume, right? That they like have packaged half the things that the world is using. So we can certainly propose that. I don't know if anyone else has any ideas on things we could do or knows of any problems that we want tackling that aren't too challenging.
I mean, to me, that sounds like a road fraught with challenges. And
Okay.
so it was really just more of I was thinking, attacking some of the add-ons work would be an appropriate project, but was really more concerned about the time commitment that it would be, on like all of our behalf to just go and make sure that the people have the proper support. So, or more likely that person, right? Probably just
is there a guideline for how much time, what sort of time commitment we're talking about?
I don't know the answer.
Okay. I can sync with some people that did it previously.
Yeah, let's just check the link to the other CNCF project ideas. I think we can take a look at those and see.
It says you are expected to work 30 plus hours a week for 3 months.
Sorry, I hope that's not for the mentor side. I think that's for the person doing the work side.
Yeah, so however much mentorship somebody would need over an entire summer, we could all step in. But
I just love the fact that Thanos is a real project. I remember seeing that in like the what was it, the logs thing, Loki, like Thanos, the tool that throws away half your logs or something. But I guess it's real.
yeah, I remember when that started popping up in the Prometheus operator as a supported Thanos spec. So.
But yes, assuming that it's not a 30-hour week commitment, I would be happy to mentor someone if that we want to put in that as a project. Obviously, like having other people also help would be great, particularly when it comes to like if we decide to do that, like some of the other add-ons like that I might not be as familiar with.
Yeah, well, I think it positively wouldn't be 30 hours a week, and I think that folks are coming in to Google Summer of Code like with a background of being able to attack problems. Seems like I mean these folks are going to be in university programs, and they'll have their accompanying support system over in school as well for things that are more general.
In terms of next steps then, I guess I could make sure that the time commitment isn't going to be ridiculous and then put together a PR, which would basically say, it looks like the description is very short. I'm just reading the existing ones.
Yes, they are.
So, I mean, I can certainly put together a paragraph that says like, create a whole bunch of new add-ons for the most interesting or widely used Kubernetes add-ons. And like we expect there will be lots of challenges that arise. And so basically work with the existing community to address some of those, or surface and ideally address some of those?
I would imagine that included in that story is improving the UX and the documentation of the tools needed to do that. So if we throw that in there, right, that it's like you're making a platform contribution to the community. Like there are artifacts that come out of that, like there are going to be add-ons, but like right now, that's not something that we would expect even somebody senior in the Kubernetes community to be able to pick up and just go do, because there's no like path, right? So like helping create that path to add-on creation, and then like in the process, we'll produce some important add-ons.
That's a great one to put in there as well. I think, yeah, I put in some little notes for myself, but I can take that as a next step, which I will do this afternoon, therefore, or PR this afternoon. And then please feel free to add things in there if better words are coming.
Brilliant.
And of course, if anyone else wants to be a mentor, I am not saying no one else can be a mentor. Please also.
Yes, I'm happy to jump in on this. So.
Do you want to be a co-mentor type thing or your own thing?
I think it would just be like us as a community, you know, like supporting the project. So.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. We could reserve like a portion of these calls for them to come on and then report back, and could sort of help them along. But it might make sense in the beginning to do a couple of one-on-one kind of calls, so it's a bit less daunting.
It sounds like you're an incredibly fast typist.
Me? No,
Yeah.
I never learned how to use all 10 fingers, and then I got an obnoxiously loud keyboard.
Yeah, but it does sound like a paintball gun, you know? It's like... So.
Okay.
Would we get, I'm just trying to think big here, would we get 2 projects out of this, apart from packaging a bunch of add-ons? Just think of some of the, I don't know, the KubeADM integration, or you know, other bits in general that we would generally like to see, or you know, testing a bigger story, or I don't know what, like.
I think it's a good thing to pursue. I think we should be wary of like saying COPS integration or KubeADM integration, because those are more like having to understand the existing projects in the community, and not something that's sort of as self-contained.
That's right, yeah.
Which would make it harder for a person without context to come in.
Yes, it would.
And also harder for someone to like be doing it for a certain period of time.
I'm also familiar with like students who've gone through this project before and kind of blown way past the scope of their project, which I don't think anyone is going to, you know, complain about. Like if somebody's hungry to go solve a bunch of problems and they have the skill set to do so, along with some support and mentorship, then that's like the ideal scenario, I think, for everyone. Well, I won't say that, because it's also ideal, you know, if somebody with no experience comes in and then is able to meet 90% of what we set out to do. So,
yeah, I think one of the advantages of the task that we have proposed right now is it's very elastic, right? Someone can come and package an add-on and have some success metric, or someone can go and like package every add-on in the community and like integrate Docker or CI packaging and all the things we're dreaming of, and exactly
to be built, you know, like
so it's
do a lightning talk about it, it's whatever that person's goals are, we can enable them. So.
Exactly.
those are some of the things that I'd be very happy to jump in and provide, like mentorship time for, like with documentation and speaking or whatever the person wants to do. Great. Well, thanks for taking the task to write up that paragraph, and then just ping in the channel, and I'm sure we can get it polished up.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Justin and Lee, for stepping up. This is great.
Cool. Well, we've reached a point in the agenda where apparently we have a live demo. So do we need to make any sacrifices, or?
The live demo will not involve actual creation of a cluster. So the odds of it failing are, well, quite high, but not as high as they might be if there was actual Cloud API calls being made.
We're simply in an oratory theology, right?
Exactly.
So watching what's be created.
Why don't I try sharing the screen if we are at that point, if that's okay? And then, yes, thank you. I think I share. Let's try this one and see if I guessed right. Can you see me typing? Yes, perfect. All right, so I just wanted to quickly sort of show how we're thinking about add-ons in COPS. Probably it's all hidden by the feature flag in PRs, like, you know, not baked. I don't know if people can see this. I'll make it one bigger because I think that's probably a good compromise. So we have the normal COPS create cluster command basically establishes a bunch of YAML files or YAML objects, or and you basically name your cluster and you give it a zone, and that's all you need to do to instantiate or to template out a COPS cluster. What's new is we are adding the ability to add additional YAML files, which can contain essentially arbitrary bits of, or arbitrary Kubernetes objects. And I've previously run this, and if I get it, you can see that, like, so a normal COPS cluster is these two objects. There's a cluster object, and there are instance group objects, which are like similar to node pools on GKE, or auto-scaling groups on Amazon, or machine deployments in Cluster API. And what's new is we have this new add-on section where we essentially have arbitrary Kubernetes objects. And so you can see here that I have a node local DNS, or an instance of the node local DNS CRD. And I also, for now, have the CRD for the node local DNS that is instantiated like there. We can look at this in YAML. And so the cluster object, the instance group, and then we have the object itself, which, you know, should be fairly familiar to people. The add-ons, it's an add-on object, and the CRD. And now basically all that happens is when we do the normal COPS update, which is how we create the actual cluster, COPS will create the cluster as normal, and then it will go and kubectl apply the additional objects. And so in this case, the CRD gets applied, and then the local DNS instance of that CRD gets applied. And right now, in a sort of concept or proof of concept, we have the controller for node local DNS built into a COPS controller. So a controller that runs on the master effectively. And so you can see that there are lots of open questions we are creating here. Like, it's a little awkward to have the CRD defined. Oh, well, this is the bit we definitely want, or I think we want, the node local DNS instance of the CRD. This is a little awkward having the CRD itself having to be defined. So an open question is whether we should embed that. And if we do, how do we cope when there's a new version of the CRD? We don't have the controller itself visible right now. And I think another open question is, like, should we embed them? And if we do embed them, do we end up effectively recreating the problem we're trying to avoid, where once again, we need to do a COPS update to update the node local DNS controller? It's not quite as bad because the controller is not going to change nearly as much as the add-ons themselves. So right now we can update like the node local DNS version and get a new version from whatever manifest source we want. But if that version did require a new controller, we would be sort of stuck. And so we would probably want a way to turn off the built-in controllers if a newer version was available, type thing. But this is sort of a fairly reasonable way. We think that is a nice, reasonable UX, and definitely creates some problems, but like enables us to avoid putting more and more stuff into the cluster YAML. So I don't know if people have ever seen this, but I will quickly show. I don't know if any of them by default are there, but basically in the cluster object, we have a bunch of fields that are effectively like descriptions for the add-ons. So etcd clusters is a good example where we have like the configuration of etcd, and ideally that would be split out. So a better example is networking. Kubernetes. Kubernetes is not very complicated, but other CNI providers are much more complicated. And so like Weave is in here with a bunch of options, and we'd love to be able to split that out into its own CRD instance. So it would appear just in the add-on section and not be sort of lumped in with the cluster object. So that's sort of how we're thinking about things, and any feedback or heckling is very, very welcome. Or suggestions on how to fix anything is also very welcome.
Thanks, Justin. I like this UX. As far as feedback and heckling goes, I have feedback. So I think for me, it makes sense for the CRD, the operator, and then optionally, like whatever number of custom resource instances to be supplied in a place that's next to each other from a UX standpoint, with the constraint that you would want to be able to support a third party of add-ons that you do not manage. So I think that UX does make sense. I also think that it's okay to have some controllers like embedded or automatically installed by the project, or to do like some just-in-time controller installation of some blessed add-ons. That pattern is similar to the add-on installer behavior that I expect will behave, like how it will behave in KubeADM, where it's like if you don't supply anything, KubeADM will, figure, oh, well, you're probably going to want these, right, as a default behavior. And so that makes sense to me. As far as the UX of like how you would actually bundle up things, because you're just working on a single resource basis there in that kind of generic application thing. That is a place where we could look at how the add-on installer might help from an API standpoint, since it's basically just a little shim of code that turns component config into a bunch of bundled add-ons being installed with, customize or code. But yeah, that looks really cool. It looks like a nice UX, and breaking that out from the cluster config is super desirable. So
yes, yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I think you're probably right in that it would be good to have it be very explicit with the controller for, in this case, node local DNS right there. But yeah, as you point out, today we have those objects individually split out, so it's okay for the CRD, which is only one object, but for a controller, which is a set of 5 maybe objects, like it could be a little hard to keep track of. So we would like some way to bundle those. And yeah, I'll look at the add-on installer in light.
I think there's power here in the idea of like actually bundling a package of multiple artifacts, or having a single artifact with multiple manifests in it that is called something. And that's what the add-on installer's goal is like, what's the minimal way that we can share some packages, right? And then with Evan's KPG work, right, that could be a container image, it could be a Git repo, it's just, HTTP reachable manifest, like all of that is fine. And it can be one thing or many things. But then that's how you could get the CRD and the operator installed as a single name. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up. This problem of like calling a set of manifests by a name. That's what that manifest bundle cap is about. if we could figure out, so like if we could figure out a good way to say like, here's how you do plain manifests, or here's how you do customized manifests, or here's how you do add-on manifests, like if it's unique enough that it needs to be its own sort of kind within that framework. But it would be really nice to be able to like push and pull these things and have one name for them.
I heartfully agree there. I think we have a lot of amorphous ways of like shipping around our blobs outside of the cluster, and a little bit of standardization would not hurt the ecosystem, right? This provides a useful general purpose vehicle to actually share clusters of these things or bundles of these things. Yeah.
Maybe it's worth walking through the both KubeADM and COPS as like potential applications to just say like, if we use them for these two applications, what would it look like, and how does it simplify it? Just as like a straw man for going forward with it in some way. I did have a question, Justin. I didn't mean to completely derail. It looks like it shows you which add-ons are installed based on which new CRDs were added. Is it just like finding the CRDs that you've added with the @-add and calling those add-ons?
Yes, it's calling add-ons anything else. Like, so basically, like today we have clusters and instance groups are our two like built-in kinds, and now we've basically added an unstructured bucket, and anything else is called an add-on. But yes, we could certainly, like when you were talking, I was saying, oh, maybe we should split out like, I don't know whether you call it like a manifests and objects or something might be a better term. Then we'd have like 4 types, or we could just, but yes, like somehow. But that is what they are. Like the anything else bucket is currently labeled add-ons, but they are just objects that are applied to the cluster.
Okay, interesting. It's definitely in the same vein of like problems that we were thinking about with that add-on discovery operator, where you're just kind of like, okay, now you've applied manifests. If I have a cluster already and I want to find out what the add-on is, what was installed, how do I tell? Because I've just got like a jumble of CRDs here.
Yes, these don't yet exist in a Kubernetes cluster. These are effectively a set of files. Today they are living on S3, right? Or in this case, they're living on, well, actually, I think it's either S3 or GCS, I can't remember. And then, but like a lot of people put those in Git, and then there is a separate state that is the Kubernetes state. And the state which COPS shows is the file state, whether it's in S3 or GCS.
I gotcha. Okay, thank you. It was unclear to me.
So we don't need to, we don't need to filter as much.
It's interesting though, because the result of all of that is like pods and secrets and config maps and things like that on the cluster, right?
Very much so, yes. And like particularly for the case of add-ons, and in future for the case of cluster and instance groups, we will be applying those directly to the cluster. So okay. There will in future be a one-to-one mapping, but today, particularly for clusters and instance groups, there is not. For add-ons, there, and for the other miscellaneous bucket, there will be.
I see. So COPS could maybe tell you what add-ons exist because it has this context of whatever is in your S3 bucket or whatever. But that may not be the case for people who are not using COPS, or for people who are looking at a cluster created by COPS without access to that data.
Correct. And we are moving, like what I was sort of describing is like, as we adopt cluster API, we will increasingly have a one-to-one mapping. And so it's not entirely clear what happens to the COPS CLI tool at that point. Like, should it go and ask the cluster, or should it go and ask S3? And what if it's going to go ask the cluster, what's the point of the COPS CLI tool? Because why isn't it just kubectl type thing? So
this is a really interesting problem space that I think I'm like starting to understand more completely, which is like, how does the bootstrap, or outside cluster configuration, like ultimately become introspected, like inside the cluster? Is that appropriate? Is that secure? And how does that help people? And then what is the appropriate mechanism to do that? Because, Yeah, I mean, we're doing effectively the same thing in the Kubernetes proof of concept, where like you have the add-on installer component config, right? And that's provided to Kubernetes, before the cluster's bootstrapped or as the cluster is upgrading, right? It's like an outside the cluster thing that then Kubernetes is mirroring, like for longevity, like into a config map inside of the cluster, right? Which is sort of like COPS equivalent for a state store, except that the COPS state store would live on beyond the length of the cluster, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the Kubernetes case, you would hope that somebody had checked it into Git, or something else. And yeah. And then it's like when you get into the add-on introspection side of things, right, where it's like, how can we surface the status of these? What is the marriage of the outside configuration, in cluster persisted configuration, and the ability for the introspection tools to surface status about those things? And like, what's the best way to do that in a way where the APIs mirror each other, but also have a modularity?
That's a really great way to put it. Yeah, I like that a lot. Particularly as like when they may not exist in the Kubernetes cluster yet, right? But you also want to, you want to see in both worlds, as it were. Yeah, I like COP sort of doesn't really tackle that to date. So yeah.
I'm thinking if we can append to each other's APIs, we can end up with the same API, right? That then just has like optional things in there. I wouldn't be against, like Kubernetes adding a CRD to the cluster, like to have a formal, like mutable, appendable portion of the add-ons installation API, right? And maybe at that point, it's not an installation API, it's a declaration. But yeah, very cool. Because then that would allow you to do that from the COPS side, and it would allow the introspection to use that, as a mechanism for aggregating on those things.
Yeah, I thank you all for the feedback. It's super helpful. I'm definitely gonna. I think there is this distinction between like a bundle or a manifest and the instance of the CRD, and so I'm gonna read the KEP now from that viewpoint. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a similar distinction within operator framework stuff, where we have these bundles of things that we talk about before they've applied to the cluster, but then once they're on the cluster, there's a specific API type that we use for all of our status aggregation and that sort of thing. And it's much less generic than the stuff we've been talking about here, but we have the same split, and it seems pretty important to make the distinction.
And then also there's a difference between the operator itself and the thing that is being operated, right? So you probably have a separate application or a separate like addition of the custom resource that actually gets operated. Like those are probably packaged separately, or are they the same?
Well, for operator framework operators, there's a type that packages the operator that says like, this is what it is running in the cluster. Mm-hmm. And then the operator itself manages its own CRDs. So whatever the instances of those CRDs configure in the cluster, that's what that operator's domain is.
Yeah, so the CRD and the operator are bundled and applied together.
Yeah, those are both parts of like the manifest off cluster manifest bundle that we apply when you install an operator.
But then how to actually make the operated thing occur, right? Like say you are using etcd operator.
Yep.
Right? And the etcd CR that's packaged separately, right?
Well, it's not really packaged at all, because that's kind of on the user.
Okay.
Right. So that's the second step is I have the ability to make etcd clusters. Which ones do I want to make, and how many, and what size, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Which I think is what Justin, you were saying, you're seeing that difference and like want to figure out how to support it. Cool. Okay. Well, sweet demos. Good progress. Great conversation. Just like adding some meta filler in here until we decide to move on with the final agenda topic. Bit CRDs and bread controllers. So there was a list of open questions, and then we talked about a bunch of stuff we didn't write down. The last thing, I guess, is I had a thing to share on the agenda. When we were on this call last, I was struggling with the problem of a regression in Kubernetes component config handling, where we weren't going to handle multiple versions of configs and that kind of thing. And that story is still continuing. Right now, Rusty has a PR up that allows for some out of supported version handling of YAML blobs with like no Kubernetes default customization and that kind of thing. So that's neat. And I think it does serve a lot of the use cases. And then they also said, for now, while we're working through all this stuff, maybe instead of requiring an API machinery conversion from the user, could you just pin to a single API version in the add-on library as an input, which is a workaround and probably not the way that APIs should work from a vendoring side of things, but I'm fine to do that. It's an easy change. So just a heads up on how that library is going to be used for that use case. But I don't think it's the most like general thing we can do, but it makes enough sense to try it out. So, and that's all I had to share. We are at the end of our agenda. If anyone else wanted to bring up any additional topics, we do have time, but otherwise just be nice to end early. So.
I just noticed that we would be the first Kubernetes sub-project or SIG to add a project idea for Summer of Code. So we might attract some attention.
Has nobody else submitted?
There's a bunch of CNCF projects that have submitted,
but not anything from Kubernetes.
Yes.
Okay.
Are there any PRs, maybe?
No.
Maybe we're just mad at merging PRs.
Maybe.
It is a little strange to me that there isn't anything there. I'm hesitant to add anything for WG component standard because we already have, such an active mentorship structure there. But maybe that's a little bit
Can always
selfish.
try.
Yeah.
This does feel like a good Summer Code project. Like it feels like not requiring a ton of context, unlike many of the other Kubernetes projects. So that might be why.
Makes sense. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. And see you in 2 weeks. Bye.